We have covered the Suez Canal before as a trade choke point. Today we are covering something different, not what it costs when it closes, but who goes hungry. Egypt is the world's largest importer of wheat. An aerial photograph shows the Nile Delta from space, the green triangle of irrigated farmland spreading into the Mediterranean Sea, with Cairo visible as a dense urban sprawl at its apex, feeding 106 million people. 106 million people. The Egyptian government sells subsidized flatbread called baladi bread at approximately 5 cents per loaf. It has done so for decades. The bread program is the most important social contract the Egyptian government maintains with its people. Without affordable bread, Egypt has riots. History has demonstrated this repeatedly, and almost every grain of wheat that goes into that bread arrives by ship. Through the Suez Canal, a canal that is 193 kilometers long, and at its narrowest point no wider than a country road is long. Now look at a map of the region. A map of North Africa and the Middle East shows the countries surrounding the Suez Canal: Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, all highlighted in orange, indicating food import dependency. The Gulf states import between 80 and 90% of all the food their populations consume. Almost none of it is grown domestically. Chatham House research confirmed that over 80% of the Gulf states' wheat arrives through the Suez Canal. Algeria imports approximately 75% of its food. Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon, all heavily dependent on imported grain arriving through the same route, the most food import-dependent region on Earth. Its entire food supply flowing through one canal, 193 kilometers of Egyptian desert. Before we explain what happens when it stops moving, let us understand why this situation exists at all. Subscribe to Where on Earth and hit the bell. The Suez Canal opened in 1869. Before it existed, ships sailing from Asia to Europe had to navigate around the entire southern tip of Africa. An aerial view shows the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, the dramatic rocky coastline where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans meet, adding approximately 7,000 to 10,000 nautical miles to every journey, adding weeks of time, adding enormous fuel costs. The canal reduced the Asia-Europe route by approximately 10,000 kilometers. The saving was so large that the entire architecture of global trade restructured around it within a generation. Supply chains that had been designed for the long Cape route were redesigned for the short Suez route. Just-in-time delivery systems were built on the assumption that ships would always be able to transit the canal. The canal became so central to global trade that 12% of all global seaborne trade passes through it. Approximately 40 to 50 ships per day before the current disruption, carrying grain oil, consumer goods, chemicals, fertilizers, fuel, and manufacturing components. The geographic concentration of this volume through a single 193-kilometer passage created an extraordinary vulnerability, and on March 23, 2021, that vulnerability was demonstrated to the entire world. A single container ship called the Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal. The iconic aerial satellite photograph shows the Ever Given, 400 meters long, wedged diagonally across the full width of the Suez Canal, blocking all traffic with excavators visible on the sandy banks. 400 meters long, 224,000 tons, wedged across the canal so completely that no ship could pass in either direction. The blockage lasted 6 days. During those 6 days, $9.6 billion of global trade was blocked every single day. 369 ships queued at either end of the canal, unable to move. They carried grain, wheat, corn, fertilizers, livestock fuel oil, and consumer goods. Global commodity markets reacted within 48 hours. Wheat prices on the Chicago Board of Trade rose as traders calculated delays to bulk grain shipments heading from Black Sea ports to North African buyers. Fertilizer prices rose as Persian Gulf shipments to South Asian farming countries were delayed. The Egyptian government quietly accelerated emergency grain procurement from alternative suppliers at higher prices. Gulf states monitored to rein their strategic food reserves. International food aid organizations recalculated delivery schedules. In 6 days, one ship revealed the entire fragility of the food supply chain, connecting the world's breadbaskets to the world's hungriest import-dependent populations. On day 7, the Ever Given was freed by a flotilla of Egyptian, Dutch, and Italian tugboats. Traffic resumed. The crisis passed. Most people moved on. Almost nobody thought carefully about what had just been proven. Now let us understand the specific geography of how food moves through the Suez Canal. A diagram shows the major grain export routes converging on the Suez Canal. Bulk carrier ships from the Black Sea region loaded with Russian and Ukrainian wheat heading south through the Mediterranean toward the canal entrance at Port Said, Egypt. The Black Sea is the world's most important wheat export zone. Russia exports approximately 40 to 45 million tons of wheat per year. That is more than any other country. Ukraine before the war exported approximately 20 million tons per year. Romania, Bulgaria, and smaller Black Sea producers add more. Combined, the Black Sea region supplies approximately 30% of all global wheat exports in a normal year. The primary destination for much of this wheat is North Africa and the Middle East. Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon. And the route from the Black Sea to Egypt is through the Mediterranean and into the northern end of the Suez Canal at Port Said, heading south through the canal, emerging at Suez into the Red Sea, turning east or west depending on the final destination. This is the breadbasket to bowl route, from the wheat fields of Ukraine and Russia through the canal to the subsidized bread programs of Cairo and Alexandria and Casablanca and Algiers. For Egypt, the dependency was almost total. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Egypt sourced approximately 85% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine combined. 85% of the most important staple food of 106 million people, from two countries whose supply was suddenly disrupted. Egypt scrambled to find alternative suppliers after the 2022 invasion: Romania, the United States, India, France. But the wheat still arrives by ship, and the ship still has to transit the Suez Canal or take the much longer Cape of Good Hope route. Now let us understand what the 2026 situation looks like in real time. A map shows shipping routes across the Red Sea in 2026, with most major carrier routes diverting around the Cape of Good Hope rather than transiting through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait toward the Suez Canal. We covered the Red Sea crisis in detail in our previous videos on choke points. Since late 2023, Houthi forces in Yemen have been attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea. The attacks forced most major shipping lines to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14 days to each voyage, adding $1 to $1.8 million in additional fuel costs per round trip. Suez Canal transit fees, which generate approximately $9 to $10 billion per year for Egypt, collapsed as traffic fell sharply. Egypt, already managing approximately $27 billion in external debt obligations in 2026, lost a critical revenue stream simultaneously. The Suez Canal Authority reported that canal traffic and revenue remained well below pre-crisis levels as of May 2026. Most carriers remained on the Cape route. The canal itself was operational, but the southern approach through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea was still hostile, and the FAO issued a formal warning on March 26, 2026. Its chief economist warned of severe global food security risks from disruption to the regional trade corridor. The warning specifically identified Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, and Egypt as among the most vulnerable countries. The reason Bangladesh was on that list: Bangladesh entered the crisis with fuel reserves of only 9 to 14 days. Fuel that powers irrigation pumps for rice paddy fields during the critical growing season. No fuel means no irrigation. No irrigation means crop failure. Not next season. This season. The delay does not just cost money, it can cost a harvest that cannot be recovered. Now let us understand the fertilizer dimension of this food geography. A bulk carrier loaded with fertilizer bags departs from a Persian Gulf port in Qatar for delivery to agricultural regions across South and East Asia. Grain itself is not the only food-critical cargo that travels through the Suez corridor. Fertilizer is equally essential. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the countries of East Africa depend on fertilizer imports to maintain their crop yields. The Persian Gulf is one of the world's largest fertilizer production zones. Qatar produces urea. Saudi Arabia produces ammonia-based fertilizers. These fertilizers are exported by ship heading east and southeast to South Asian and East African agricultural markets. They travel through the Bab el-Mandeb into the Red Sea, or through the Hormuz Strait heading east to South Asian ports. Both of those corridors are under varying degrees of disruption in 2026. Fertilizer that does not arrive before the planting season cannot be applied to the crop after it has been planted. The agricultural calendar is not flexible. Miss the window and the yield of the entire growing season is permanently reduced. The FAO medium-term disruption scenario projects reduced yields for fertilizer-intensive crops, including wheat, rice, and maize. Not in some future year, in the current growing season. Bangladesh is in its critical boro rice season. India is facing reduced domestic fertilizer production ahead of the Kharif season. Egypt is highly exposed due to its reliance on imported wheat. These are not hypothetical risks. They are the real agricultural calendar of 2026, intersecting with real supply chain disruption. Now let us understand why there is no adequate alternative at scale. A freight train loaded with grain cars travels across the Central Asian steppe as an illustration of the rail alternative to maritime shipping. When the Ever Given blocked the canal for 6 days, the first question people asked was whether alternative routes could absorb the traffic. The answer revealed the geographic reality of global food supply. A single large bulk carrier moves between 60,000 and 200,000 tons of grain. A single freight train moves approximately 2,000 to 4,000 tons. To move one large grain shipment by rail requires 50 to 100 trains. The rail infrastructure of Central Asia does not have the capacity to replace even a fraction of the Suez Canal's grain throughput. The Cape of Good Hope route adds 14 days. It adds cost, it is being used, but it is slower and more expensive, and that slowness and cost are paid somewhere in the supply chain, ultimately by the consumers of the most import-dependent countries, the populations that spend the highest share of their income on food. Now let us understand the political geography of food supply disruption. A street market in Cairo, Egypt shows vendors selling vegetables and bread with crowds of shoppers, the daily food economy of the Arab world's most populous city. In 2010, a Russian drought reduced global wheat supply. Wheat prices spiked. In January 2011, Mohamed Bouazizi, a Tunisian street vendor, set himself on fire in protest at police harassment. The protest became a revolution. Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria all experienced regime-challenging uprisings within months. The Arab Spring, multiple causes were involved, but food price spikes were a documented trigger. Chatham House published research arguing that global food price spikes in 2007 to 2008 and 2010 to 2011 were significant contributors to the political instability that preceded the Arab Spring. The connection between Suez Canal, disruption, and political instability in North Africa and the Middle East is not theoretical, it is historical, documented, repeated. The World Bank confirmed in March 2026 that wheat prices are 7% higher year-on-year. Maize prices are 20% higher than January 2020 levels. Global food price inflation disproportionately hits the poorest populations. The populations that depend on the grain that travels through the world's most dangerous food supply chain. One canal, 193 kilometers. 12% of global trade, 80% of Gulf wheat, 85% of Egypt's historical wheat supply, the world's most food import-dependent region, and no adequate alternative at the volumes the modern world requires. The canal is operating. The approach to it remains disrupted. The food supply chain is more strained than at any point since the Second World War, and somewhere in the queue of ships still taking the long way around Africa, there is grain, heading toward the subsidized bread programs of people who cannot afford for it to be late. Subscribe to Where on Earth for weekly geography that reveals the forces governing global food security. Hit the bell and drop your thoughts in the comments below, because the world looks very different when you understand the geography of where your food actually comes from.